Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 19 in a 20-part series I am doing covering second founding successor chapters of Space Marines in the Order of the Legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but it would make me happy. Part 19 means we're going to be covering the Raven Guard successors, and I find Raven Guard successors are really weird. Not in the same way that Ultramarine successors are weird, where the Primogenitor chapter is incredibly basic and the successors are just goofy, but I guess that's kind of the point. The Ultramarines are a chapter defined by their balance in all traits without having anything overstep and be considered a specialism. So when you have a chapter like the Raven Guard that has a very obvious specialization, you do start to see some of the weirder shit kind of come down the pipeline. Am I making sense? Okay, so you can take the Ultramarines. They themselves are pretty basic, like I said, so their successor chapters have the opportunity to specialize in anything, and that's usually what defines each individual chapter, except for the Genesis chapter. You want to be better at melee? There is an Ultramarine successor for that. You want to be better at small group tactics and sustained assaults? There is a chapter for that. You want to be better at marksmanship? There's a chapter for that. But with the Raven Guard, there is that initial template for more or less all successors to follow, which is being stealthy, liking jump packs, and having a bit of a bird motif, which kind of leads you to think they have a very similar issue to that of the Blood Angels, where every chapter is a vampire, every chapter is melee focused, and every chapter is just mostly red. With the Raven Guard, oddly enough, no. They are uncomfortably diverse in their representation of the traits of their original legion. So with that in mind, the Raptors, a chapter that is dictated by tragedy, the complete humbling of the Space Marine chapter as a whole, and being the most reasonable set of Marines to ever exist. On the list of things I think about a lot, 40k paint schemes, and specifically paint scheme changes, are kind of high on that list. It kind of goes to show what I got going on in the run of a day. It doesn't happen often, changes in paint schemes, that is. And hell, the Imperium of Mankind is more likely to reuse paint schemes than they are to give a chapter a new one. But on the topic of paint schemes, one of the original paint schemes for the Raptors was this fucking abomination, and I think about it a lot. It's up there with the Minotaur's original paint scheme, where there has to have been some kind of reason for it to have been changed over. It's usually something as simple as no one was playing it or it was too difficult to paint, but the in-lore reason is the reason I think makes changes like that most interesting. For the Minotaurs, the original chapter died off and they were replaced by a proxy chapter that would be under the control of the High Lords of Terra. Allegedly. But for the Raptors, it's less cut and dry. See, the original paint scheme were supposed to be flashy, so they stood out on the tabletop. If you were to go back to the 80s and 90s of Warhammer, they were all about bright color schemes. Even the Black Templars had a bunch of incredibly bold reds and whites in their schemes that made it so that they kind of stood out a bit more. So, what is my theory as to the change? Well, for one, the Raptors paint scheme is kind of lame. It doesn't look really that fun to paint, and it looks kind of gaudy and not in a good way. The colors clash too much, so they changed it over to something else. But the in-lore reason to the change itself, well, this is a good place to start for the chapter history of the Raptors. You find out that they are a Raven Guard successor that has been forced to endure tragedy after tragedy. Their history is underlined by the fact that they have experienced numerous near extinctions. Several times has the chapter been brought to the brink of extinction, and just as such, they have been brought back. Most times, from what I've read, is from Chaos, and I think Abaddon and a Black Crusade at one point did something like that. But there has been times where they dealt with Xenos, and that has almost put them under. I like to think that the new paint scheme is a result of them having to sort of trial and error their way to survival. Like the brightly colored dudes on a jungle world getting shot to shit made them all kind of realize that, hey, maybe having neon blue and yellow does not make tactical sense much for what we plan to do. So with them having to do that Raven Guard thing of being put into numerous different small groupings and survive the worst circumstances imaginable, you can see how that would change their mindset towards the world around them and warfare as a whole. It has instilled probably the most logical pragmatism of every Marine to ever exist. I'm not joking, there is no hyperbole. These guys are the most tactically sound Space Marines in the entirety of 40k. The reason being is when you have the level of power that a Space Marine has, you can afford different strategies that might not work for someone who isn't as armored or as physically strong. So a Ultramarine can be bright blue and run face first into a gun line, because that will end up with the gun line being killed. The armor will soak up the majority of the damage, and if it doesn't, your Space Marine physiology will carry you through that. So with the Raptors, they employ traditional military tactics that Space Marines wouldn't need to employ, and it's only amplified by their ability to be rational, pragmatic, and the fact that they're fucking Space Marines. So my theory is that eventually the blue and yellow is found out to be not so great for their survives. So what they did is make their armor a camo style green. Not just that, but they realized that melee is a fucking idiotic thing to engage with when you're dealing with this. So they specialize in Navy SEAL style ranged recon and extermination style shit. Honestly, they don't enjoy melee, but they do understand its importance for some encounters, and that's the fun part about them. The key element to the Raptors is their ability to adapt and overcome any situation. If they are fighting incredibly fast melee combatants, where range would not work as well for them, well, they are going to try to lock them down, single them out, and kill them in the most efficient way possible. If that means chain swords, then go for it. Sometimes they do like melee. Though, as I mentioned, they do prefer ranged combat almost entirely. Kind of in the same vein as the Tau, but more with a Raven Guard flair, as they don't have the same advanced weaponry as the Tau. Each individual member would set up a killing spot hidden from the enemies and wait for the perfect moment to blow their fucking heads off with a bolt gun. Alongside that, they also enjoy jump packs, like their primogenitor, but they, for some reason, really enjoy twin pistols instead of the standard bolt pistol and chainsword thing that most Assault Marines have going on. So that's kind of fun. They field an incredibly packed 10th Company, and for those who don't know what that means, the 10th Company of Space Marines in a chapter is dedicated to training scouts and stealth-oriented Marines. So they specialize in a lot of sniping, quiet order tactics, and so on. They often get along with other chapters in a very pragmatic kind of way. In interactions they have had with multiple different Space Marine chapters over a wartime command type situation. Think War for Armageddon, where there's multiple different Space Marine chapters that have to work with each other in conjunction. They will often vie for their own control over the situation, putting their figureheads, such as captains, chapter masters, and so on, in a command role. But if they get superseded by another Space Marine leader, even if they view that person as having a flawed sense of command, they will not take it personally in the slightest, and they will be incredibly rational about the entire situation. They will work to the best of their abilities with the plans that the person lays down, and they will never try to undercut or go over their heads for any situation. That's incredibly pragmatic, rational, and very good for the morale of everybody around them. But this ties into the biggest fucking sticking point for them in the setting. Essentially, the chapters of Space Marines that know of the Raptors, they tend to formulate one of two opinions. One, the Raptors are quiet, efficient, and good at their job. Two, they are cowards, wretches, and do not adhere to any of the holy texts. Which is fair. They have a very rational idea of how to operate the Codex Astartes, which is that it is probably the best military guidebook in the entire universe. But it is only that, a guidebook. They follow it if they so choose, but other than that, fuck it, we ball. They pride themselves as independent thinkers, and because of that, there are many members of their chapter who believe that it is free will that is the best asset for a Space Marine to have. You gotta have a brain between your shoulders if you're gonna outthink the 20 metric tons of fuck you, I'm a bug that is coming your way. And if you don't, sorry chappy, you die. A lot of other chapters tend to look at them as kind of shitty Space Marines because they honestly do not give a single shit about the majority of the stuff that Space Marines normally give a shit about. Like, for example, glory and honor. All they care about is getting the job done. So they use methods that a lot of other Space Marine chapters would find shameful. They do it for the sake of success. So couple that with their disregard with the Codex Astartes, dislike for melee, and just general dislike of flashy ornamentation outside of standard trophies, and you have yourself the reason why chapters like the Black Templars don't really like them. They, weirdly enough, in my research, it stated that the Marines of the Raptors tended to get along well with the Marines of the Red Scorpions, which is quite honestly the exact opposite of the Raptors. They are melee-loving glory hounds, which I think is neat. So, research aside, I'm going to give you my opinion on the Raptors as a whole. I adore them. I collect a lot of different Space Marines, just because I like the building and painting aspects of the hobby, more so than just playing. So I will always try to get more Marines for my Raptors force at a deal. eBay, theft, divorce settlements, you know, the standard stuff you'd get random lots of Space Marines from. So I always knew I was going to do the Raptors for this, as they are one of my favorite chapters. Now, for my perspective, I honestly think the best way to see them as a chapter is they see war and combat the way that a Space Marine should, like it's a job that they enjoy doing. The way it's often explained in lore is that they enjoy warfare, but they do not relish in it the same way that every other Space Marine does. A grim determination is the kind of phrase that gets repeated often for them. They also have a very fun, fun isn't an appropriate word for it, but they have an interesting sort of commentary on war-based post-traumatic stress, where they have this pseudo gene seed curse that comes with the chapter itself, where as they age, they often get set into this grim mentality of fatalism, which, if you're unfamiliar with the term fatalism, it means they assume that in some circumstances, it's a foregone conclusion that they will either win or lose. And if they think that they are going to lose at the later stages of this pseudo curse, they will likely kind of give up. That, alongside the fact that apparently Corax's gene seed is so fucking strong that it makes their skin get paler and paler as they age, getting so pale white that it almost glows in direct sunlight, or direct light in general. But alongside that, their hair gets darker and darker to become almost pitch black. So, with this grim fatalism and their pallid features, it's obviously kind of a commentary on becoming the thing you see in others, death incarnate in this case, because they resemble walking grim reapers with their helmets off. But fuck me, is it crazy how much they succeed in war. So if you're on the enemy side, it's honestly pretty intimidating if you ever see one with their helmets off. One last note before I close off, their chapter master, Laius Isidon, is just a fucking beast of a man. So yeah, that's the Raptors summed up to some degree, to make it kind of digestible for everyone else to kind of enjoy. They're a chapter that, due to them losing their home world, they have no chapter relics, so they have to deal with things with only the modern equipment that is kind of shitty, and they are very pragmatic and rational about it. What do you guys think of the Raptors? Love them? Hate them? I want to know, so let me know in the comments as per the usual. Alongside that, remember to like and subscribe, and special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, remember, I'm in your walls.